conference, I should like to do two things. First, I'll offer some philosophical reflections on the notion of progress. And secondly, I'll introduce the bigger program of which our conference is a part. Progress is, of course, a normative notion. Or perhaps better, it is a notion with an implied reference to a norm, as well as an implied reference to time. Something cannot instantiate progress unless there is something else, something earlier, compared to which the former and later thing does, in a particular respect, do better. And saying that one thing does better than another in some respect entails that there is a norm for betterness in that respect. Now, this all is very abstract. Can we bring it down to earth and make it more concrete? Let me try. The first thing to note is that you can't say that something is progress. You can't say this book or this machine or this investigation or this musical composition is progress. But we can say, and perhaps should say, more when we try to talk adequately, that the machine or the book or the investigation or the musical composition embodies or instantiates or exemplifies progress. The upshot is perhaps no things are progress, but some things embody progress. Now, I assumed for a moment that machines and books, investigations, musical compositions are the sorts of things that can embody progress. But is that correct? The general question here is, what kinds of things can instantiate progress? Or more precisely, what kinds of things are such that pairs of them can stand in the following relationship to each other? One member of the pair embodies progress compared to the other member of the pair. Here, as elsewhere, we do well to pay attention to ordinary language. In our case, to pay attention to what might be called ordinary progress speech. And ordinary progress speech encompasses more than usage of the word progress. There are multiple words that can express the concept of progress. We say such things as, the pupils made progress in math. Karina made progress in playing the scales. John's grip on the complicated material improved. The methods of researching the human brain have improved considerably over time. Jill and Jack now understand each other better. Modern car engines evolved so as to be more efficient. Or Vagabond of Verse is a clear improvement over earlier biographies of Robert Service, the poet. Going by this list, we can say that embodiments of progress include the following kinds of things: a person's abilities, methods of research, engines, biographies. And there is no reason to think that this list is exhaustive, of course. Saying this merits the question whether there are things that as a matter of principle, cannot embody progress. Now, this, I think, is a really interesting question. But we need a better grip upon the metaphysics of progress for an answer. However, I cannot say that in a moment I will offer some examples of things that I think cannot possibly embody progress. The upshot here is many things can embody progress, but perhaps not all things. Third, progress is always relativized to respect. There is no such thing as unqualified progress, no such thing as progress full stop. The sample sentences that I offered bear this out. There is progress in the pupils in the respect of their abilities to do math. In Karina, there is progress in the respect of her ability to play the scales. In John, there is progress in the respect of his grip on the complicated material. In Jill and Jack, there is progress in the respect of understanding each other. The engine embodies progress in the respect of its efficiency. Sometimes the respect of the progress is not specified, and we are supposed to supply the respect for ourselves. if the methods of brain research have improved over time, we are supposed to supply the likely respect ourselves, presumably the respect of picking up information about the brain. Recent methods do better at that than earlier ones. And if one biography is a clear improvement over an earlier one, we too are supposed to add the relevant respect ourselves, such as the respect of completeness. The earlier biography of Robert Service, for instance, left out an entire decade, or the respect of the use that has been made of archives. The later one made extensive use of archives, the earlier did not. Or the respect of style and readability, or the respect of showing contemporary relevance. When it comes to biographies, there is no shortage of respect. And so it holds for many other things. Progress is possible in many respects, but it does need a respect. To this we should add the perhaps obvious point that something can embody progress in one respect, but regress in another. The pupil's abilities to do math may have progressed, while at the same time their language abilities may have regressed. The engine may have improved in respect of its efficiency, but it may at the same time have become much more expensive, which is a respect of regression. The upshot is progress is necessarily relative to a respect. Fourth, there can be no progress unless there is there can be no progress if there is no time. Saying that something embodies progress is saying, if only implicitly, that it is in time. If there were no time, there could be no progress. If there are atemporal things, things outside of time, which I believe there are, then those things cannot possibly embody progress. If numbers, as opposed to numerals, are atemporal, then numbers cannot embody progress. 3 is a number, but it cannot embody progress. There is no respect in which it can. The very idea just doesn't make sense. The same holds for universals, realistically conceived. Universals like blueness or redness or being to the north of kind of relations, or those universals are atemporal, and hence they cannot embody progress. Now, saying that something embodies progress in a respect involves comparison with something at an earlier time. In the case of the pupils, the comparison is with an earlier phase of the pupils themselves, or with an earlier phase of their ability to do math. In the case of the engine, the comparison is with tokens of earlier types of engines. In the case of Robert Service's biography, it is with earlier biographies or biographical sketches. The upshot here is, or the point here is, no time, no progress. Moreover, there can be no progress in a particular respect unless there is, in that respect, a norm. A norm, that is to say it not quite precisely, somewhat vaguely, but for our purpose that should suffice, a norm that is responsible for when, in the respect at hand, something does better or worse than another thing. There is a norm that is responsible for the fact that a pupil that knows propositional logic as well as predicate logic does better than a pupil who only knows propositional logic. There is a norm for when one engine is better in the respect of efficiency than another. There is a norm for when one research is better in the respect of methodology, for instance, than another. An implication of this is that for a relativist about norms, there cannot really be progress at all. If we are serious about progress, then there must be norms. The upshot here is no norm, no progress. Now, over time, the Corleone family may have become a better organized and more efficient mafia family than the Tattaglia family. But we don't normally think of this as progress. the respect in which the Corleones do better than the Tatalias is in the respect of criminality. We normally think of progress when the direction in which the movement is heading is a good one, a positive one we value. However, we surely don't always or exclusively talk that way. We say that the cancer is progressing. We say that the underworld is making progress in infiltrating in politics. We say that the Russian trolls are making progress in spreading ever more misinformation. This is a reason to distinguish between a generic concept of progress and the more specialized one. And here I put up something that philosophers typically tend to find useful, but perhaps our colleagues in the theology department, not always. So I was warned by my friends that this might not be too helpful for everyone that has tuned in, but for some of the philosophers that have tuned in, it may be helpful. So the generic notion of progress is something like this. Something embodies progress. Could be defined as, first, there is a respect for which there is a norm that distinguishes between what is minimum and what is maximum on the scale of that respect. And second, compared to X or X-like things at earlier times, X is now nearer to the maximum. So if we take this on board, then the Corleones do indeed better. They make progress compared to the Tatalias. But in our conference, we don't want to use this generic notion of progress. We are much more interested in a specialized one. Special progress, I call it. The first two conditions are the same. I'll read them out again. X embodies progress if there is a respect for which there is a norm that distinguishes between what is minimum and what's maximum on the scale of that respect. Secondly, compared to X or X-like things at earlier times, X is now nearer to the maximum. And thirdly, the respect is a normatively good one. So now the Corleone example falls off. I take it that our seminar uses the specialized notion of progress, so the notion of progress on which the fact that something embodies progress is a good thing, a good-making feature of the thing at hand. That being said, we should expect substantive discussions in our seminar about the third condition, that is, about which respects are indeed the normatively good ones, and hence also about what really are examples or cases of or embodiments of progress in theology. To my mind, using the special notion will direct our attention to where the truly important issues lie, the substantive issues. And in theology, there are many such issues, of course. Just from my philosophical perspective, one or two examples, you might think there are certain doctrines in the Christian tradition and some ways of explaining them or some theories about them embody progress compared to older or earlier explanations or theories that try to capture the dogma. And there are other respects, and many of those respects will pass us by over the course of the next few days. So I'm greatly looking forward to the many and no doubt fascinating ideas, proposals, arguments, and criticisms that will be launched in our meetings over the next few days. Our winter seminar is part of a much bigger project. It's a project that is sponsored by the Templeton World Charity Foundation. This is embarrassing. It's sponsored by the Templeton World Charity Foundation, and the general title of the program is Epistemic Progress in the University. I'll shortly introduce the program as we have it up in the air right now. And I should also like to introduce you to the team of people that we have. First of all, the general question on which we are working is right now on the screen. The main question is, how can universities enable epistemic progress both policy-wise and especially, that's the second thing, in the humanities. What may epistemic progress in the humanities, what may it look like? The project is led by Rick Peels, Jeroen de Ridder, and myself. We are the three main leaders of the project. We are all philosophers, and Rick is, in addition to being a philosopher, also a theologian. We have other team members, Gijsbert van der Brink, Lex Bouter, Juri Tijdink, Vincent Traag, and I'd like to especially mention Samira van der Loo, who did so much work for making this conference work. She provided us with all sort of information. Most of you will have communicated with her, so a big thank you to you, Samira. Other members of the team include Hans van Eygen, Rachel Pear, Anne Scheel, Roland den Boef, and Iris Lechner. And there is one person that or actually two persons that I didn't immediately have pictures of. One of them is also an important figure in our program. It's Stephen Grimm from New York Fordham University. I'll say a bit more about him. The Templeton project consists of 6 sub-projects. I'll shortly go over them. The first one is the development and implementation of a normative taxonomy of universities. So a couple of us have jointly authored a paper on the idea that there are different dimensions of epistemic progress. And we thought up 5 such dimensions. And now Iris Lechner is working on this to make it to turn it into a survey checking thing that universities can apply to themselves in order to figure out how they are doing on various scales of bearing epistemic responsibility. The second project is on individual and collective scientific progress. And here the idea is, apart to figuring out what epistemic progress in general might mean, also to figure out under what circumstances epistemic progress is fostered. Is group work, is collective work, communal work, is that conducive to epistemic progress, or isn't it? The third project is on standard operating procedures in research integrity. So for this we acquired additional research from the European Foundation, and it's led by Juri Tijdink and Lex Bouter. And here the idea is there are what sort of procedures should be in place in universities to improve research integrity, and what to do in cases where research integrity is breached. So this is a very practical and, but still for universities, very important part of the project. The next one is a replication of 2 corner studies in the humanities. So we hear much these days about the replication crisis, especially in the social sciences. It seems that so far the humanities are shot-free, but perhaps there is a really good issue. We thought it was a very good thing to do to figure out whether replication studies in the humanities are possible, whether they are feasible, and whether they are desirable. And the best proof of the pudding is in the eating. So we are at the moment doing 2 replication studies, and the third one will start before too long. The next project is on progress in the humanities, non-causal explanations and a philosophy of the humanities. In the humanities, explanations are being given of a whole variety of phenomena. But many of those explanations don't seem to be of the causal variety. And in the philosophy of science, one important theory about explanation is the causal theory of explanation. To explain something is to point to the causal ancestry of the phenomenon. We're trying to figure out what's the logic of non-causal explanations, many of which we find in the humanities. The second part of this sub-project is something that I'm working on with Rick Peels and Stefan Grimm. There is an important field, academic field, philosophy of science. But why is there no such field as philosophy of the humanities? In this book project, we are arguing that there is place for something that might appropriately be called philosophy of the humanities, and that compares favorably also to the philosophy of science. The final sub-project that this epistemic progress in the university project encompasses is on epistemic progress in theology. Is there such a thing as progress in theology? Is it desirable? So many years ago, I read Umberto Eco's book, The Name of the Rose. And one theological idea that transpired in the medieval monastery was that there can be no progress in theology. The eternal truth can only be unaltered, passed on to new generations. And as a matter of fact, the task of the monastery is to secure that without any alteration, the truth is handed on. These are the sorts of questions that are in the background of this sub-project, which is led by Gijsbert van der Brink, who will be our first speaker this morning. Having presented these, first of all, the idea of progress and the main things that we're working on in this project, some closing remarks about today. First of all, there is a program change. We're sorry to have to say that Jennifer Vrije, who was on the program this afternoon, wasn't able to deliver her speech this afternoon. We're trying to organize it in such a way that she will be able to deliver tomorrow. And her spot for today will be taken over by Rick Peels. So his talk for tomorrow will be on today's program, which is at 2:15 this afternoon. So Jennifer Vrije and Rick Peels, they swap places. And today we have Rick Peels at 2:15. And tomorrow on Rick's place, there's Jennifer Vrije. When we start our first plenary session with Gijsbert van der Brink, who will give the talk on progress in theology, we invite you to mute yourself when you tune in the program. So please mute yourself. I think for this moment, I'd like to leave it at this. We'll be back at 10:45 with Gijsbert van der Brink, who will give then his speech on progress in theology. Thank you so much, and I hope you will have an enjoyable, rewarding, and fruitful conference. Thank you so much.